So in 2015, my grandfather got me, or he gifted me, an Omega constellation from 1956 that has been in my family since my great grandfather bought it in the Omega boutique in Venezuela around 1956, sometime in that time frame. They told my great grandfather that it had a lifetime warranty, which is something they don't do anymore. So it never we never sent it off for refurbishment in the 68 years I had it or in our family, and it became my property in 2015. I wore it every day proudly until it stopped ticking, until the dial fell off when I accidentally ripped it off trying to get it unstuck, and I wore it with pride. In 2018, my grandfather and I were trying to figure out how to get the dial repaired. And he came up with the idea of calling Omega and seeing if the warranty was still honored. When my grandfather contacted Omega via the phone, they put him through to the CEO of the company. And according to my grandfather, he had an hour-long discussion with the CEO of Omega about me, my watch, my great grandfather, and himself. So they had a very long discussion about the watch and its presence in my family, and he decided that he was going to honor the lifetime warranty, which was 68 years after its initial purchase. So in that time, I'm attending college and I'm getting my core classes out of the way so that I could become an electrician, which I later decide to scrap and pursue a different route altogether. But I was taking a poetry class, which I passed with an A. And after I did well in poetry, I decided to go into a script writing class or screenplay, something like that is what it was called. And my teacher in that screenplay mentioned that she had connections with talenting scouts for film production and film producers. She said she was friends with a lot of very influential people that made high budget films. Now, one day, one of our tasks as a warm up in class was to rewrite this sentence in a more exciting manner. And the sentence was James enters the room. My example was James enters the room, or no, James jumps through the window, breaking the glass, doing a roll on the ground as he stands up and shoots everyone in a room, all while keeping a cigarette in his mouth the whole time. Something to that effect is what I said. Now, I thought it was interesting that she chose to use the name James when I'm sitting in class with an Omega constellation. And she also made sure to teach us that characters in movies are often given pieces of accessories that are important to their character. And one of the pieces of accessories that's important to the character James Bond is his watch. He usually wears an Omega, sometimes it's a Rolex, and very less frequently it's a Seiko. But he almost always wears an Omega watch. I believe it's a Seamaster. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's an Omega. And I thought that was really interesting. I didn't think much of it at the time. I also wrote a poem in the class before that becomes relevant later. Um, No Time to Die comes out, the movie No Time to Die, and it copied several scenes from my screenplay. I've convinced several people. You might call me a schizophrenic nut for saying that because it sounds unbelievable, but I can prove that Omega Corporation knows who I am and that Omega is very closely linked to the 007 franchise with very, very relative ease. I can also prove that Omega has contacted me before. So No Time to Die comes out. And I never watched it. I refused to watch it because I won't get into why I refused to watch it. But I refused to watch it, but I did see the trailer. And something about the trailer struck me when I first watched it as very familiar. The scene with the Aston Martin in Italy when he pulls out the minigun from his headlights and starts blasting everybody in a circle was almost like down to the very minute detail described in my screenplay. In my screenplay, it's supposed to take in a future setting, and instead of being in Italy, it's in a alien raceway. But I describe an AK-47 coming out of the vehicle and disintegrating everybody in the proximity which is exactly what happens in No Time to Die. I even detail there being a creepy alien wearing a black shirt, and if you watch the trailer, there's an Italian man wearing a black shirt, just like I described in my screenplay, and I thought that was really strange. I didn't think much of it until the movie came out, and then in my screenplay, I described my character. I hated my teacher, and I was making fun of her by making the most ridiculous Michael Bay-esque movie I could think of. And I describe my character getting bombarded with missiles, and he does several backflips off the missiles and lands in his car and then drives off slowly in the distance with his girlfriend. Well, in the ending scenes of the 007 movie that I've seen on YouTube, James gets bombarded with missiles, and he doesn't survive the backflip, but when he gets hit with the missiles, he does several backflips off the screen, just like I described in my screenplay. And then what ends up happening, they change the characters around, but what ends up happening is the main character's girlfriend and his daughter end up driving off in the distance, just like I described in my screenplay. Now, I'm sure there are other references to my screenplay in No Time to Die, but since I refuse to watch the movie, I can't pick and choose what scenes look similar, because I don't know. I've never seen the movie. I've just seen snippets of it. But I do find it incredibly coincidental that those two scenes appear in my screenplay almost word for word as they happen in No Time to Die. Now, fast forward a couple of years later, I log into Twitter for the first time, shortly before Elon Musk purchased it, and I go by the name 007 because I don't want people to know who I am. And the Bond franchise has already stolen stuff from me before about my life, because I loosely based the screenplay off my life, but then I embellished it in the later chapters. I've never been hit by missiles, obviously, but there are some key points of my life that were included in that script that was adapted into No Time to Die. And so I go by 007. Since they stole from me and made me their main character, I went by 007. Now, I started learning computer programming. I started learning Python, and I got really into Caesar ciphers and Rot ciphers. And so I started putting messages through a Caesar cipher and messaging those to people. And like a year later, after I started doing that, the 007 franchise releases the mobile game Cypher. And I start thinking, oh, that's really interesting just through the name alone. And I start playing it. And sure enough, there's a moment in the game that is dictated in my poetry that I wrote in the same college at a poetry class instead of a script writing class, years before this game came out. And I thought that was really similar to what it is I did. So fast forward about a year after that, my life is in danger. It's still in danger. There's someone that promised to kill me that's chasing me around my town, shot at me several times. And so I want to preserve a piece of myself in history. So I decide to publish my writing. I published a lot of my poems and some of my screenplays to Amazon Kindle. And then about 9 months pass from me doing that, and I receive a birthday message from a concierge at Omega that says the Omega family wishes me a happy birthday, which sounded like a great... I do believe they did it in good faith, but it had horrible consequences that I felt very offended by. I decide to reply to him, and I say, hey, listen, No Time to Die in the game Cypher use very similar scenes as I depicted in my screenplay and poems that I published to Amazon. He doesn't really reply to my message, but I know he saw it, because 4 to 6 months later, I forget the exact time frame, the 007 franchise decides to sell off the rights to James Bond to Amazon, which creates a conflict of interest, meaning that if I were to sue the 007 franchise for plagiarizing me, I would be suing the same company that owns the rights to the work they plagiarized, meaning I can't. I'd be suing the same company. Amazon owns both titles, so it's a conflict of interest. They very greedily, I feel, wanted to avoid paying me anything they could, and instead of paying me for the work and recognizing what it is I did, they chose to create a conflict of interest and protect their own asses from being sued. And I felt that was incredibly greedy. I felt very offended by that. Instead of like recognizing the similarities, they just went hush hush, forget I existed, and treated me like I was their content slave, and just totally erased me from history. And this isn't the first time I've complained about people stealing my ideas. It happened much later, but Honkai Star Rail used a character design that was very similar to the anime girl of myself painting that I drew, and even named it Robin after me. And there's several things about Robin that I've spoken about in a previous video that I find very similar to myself. For instance, one year they dropped Robin on my birthday, September 10th, which was yesterday. They had a gotcha fucking whatever you call it for Robin the same day as my birthday, which I don't think was a coincidence. My name is Robin, the character's name was Robin. It looks exactly like the painting I drew, and I don't think it's a coincidence. Several mainstream artists have copied me before. Hololive got in trouble. This pisses off the fan of Hololive, but Hololive has gotten in trouble for copying me before as well, and I made a huge issue about that because people keep stealing my ideas, but throwing so much dirt over my name and keeping me hidden from the general public that I'll probably never see the light of day in my lifetime because so many greedy executives are trying to keep me hidden. Because I'm producing a lot of the blueprints that you are seeing in the mainstream media, and that's a fact. If you don't believe it, the people over at Omega and the 007 franchise were so intimidated by my writing that they had to create a conflict of interest. You know, they had to do something about it so that they could protect their own IP. And I just find it laughable that instead of helping a man out on SSI, they effectively robbed millions of dollars from me, hundreds of millions of dollars, and gave it to greedy corporate executives who already have 4 or 5 condos in Miami and want another super yacht that they can travel the world on. Meanwhile, I'm getting chased around my neighborhood and people are firing guns at me, and I'm lucky to be alive. You know, it makes me incredibly sad because my life was stolen from me. My life is in incredible danger, and the people who have stolen from me and could change my life for the better by paying me the amount they stole from me are instead choosing to throw more dirt over me and keep me hidden and basically ostracize me from the mainstream because I make them look bad when I say the 007 franchise is guilty of plagiarism of millions of dollars.